Welcome to Archway's Threads, a show focusing on the threads of family and recovery support services that help make up the tapestry of life in recovery. Join us as we share stories from peers and participants in the field and practice of peer recovery support and family support and strengthening. And now, your host, Archway CEO, Michelle Lennon.
Hi, I'm Michelle Lennon, and I want to thank you for joining us for the third and final wrap-up of our conversation with Karen Welford. If you've missed the first two episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to where we started, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our conversation. So we've talked about the 9 principles. Mm-hmm. Are you up for talking about the 5 protective factors?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So when we talk about family support as a practice, we have these 9 principles we just talked about. And then the Strengthening Families framework is something that was put out by the Center of Social Policy many, many years ago. And it has been adapted nationally, across the country in family support practice, and is really the framework, I think, that most family resource centers are working out of throughout the country now.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't always the case.
No, and that's absolutely true, but it is amazing. Well, just thinking about the standards of quality, which incorporate the protective factors, when New Hampshire started to adopt them as our criteria for those family resource centers of quality, that was in 2013 or maybe somewhere around there. But at that time, there were 11 networks across this country that were using these protective factors as part of quality. And now there are 44 out of the 50 states that have networks of family resource centers that are using the quality. So that just shows how much in the last 8 years, this has just become a framework that family strengthening and support really stands by.
Yeah. And I think, for me, 15 years ago, I had been trained, I think, in the strengthening families framework, and again, it's like it works. So you kind of work these actions, these everyday actions into the, the families that you're working with according to what they want.
That's right.
And some of them are very basic, like communication skills.
That's right.
That go along with the protective factors. But right. the first parental protective factor we generally talk about is parental resilience. Like, how well does a family bounce back in a time of crisis?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is something that I do a lot of thinking about and realize especially with families that I've worked with and are just talked with others about. So often we see not only do they bounce back, but they bounce back better.
Yes.
Which was something that I never had thought of before, but families have really taught me that. Mm-hmm. And the resilience that you can see and hopefully promote with families, because you're doing it consciously, mm-hmm. really is truly, it has been a gift to me to see the strength of families.
Yeah.
And the resilience that they can show is amazing.
One of the things I have come to realize is when people come through our door looking for help with something, and usually that's how people show up, right? Something has happened and they're looking for some assistance because they're at their wits' end. They don't know how to navigate whatever might be out there to help them. They just don't know. They connect with us. We help them problem solve, but then they've learned that skill.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And
that's building resilience.
Yeah.
I don't know, before I really started to think about these protective factors, I don't know whether I thought, oh, well, that's building resilience. I just thought we're helping them problem solve. But that is what you're doing with families when you break down the steps. Mm-hmm. We've always been so good at, okay, here's the issue. Here's what you want to do. Let's break it down into steps and just take one of them. That's resilience. Yeah. So we now have, and that's what's been so important to the field, is that we now have that framework, that we have the same common language of this is what we do.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yeah. And it does change things. And the other thing that I love is that we recognize as family support specialists that people are bringing different types of things with them to the table when we talk about resilience. So, and I use the example, like for me, I was driving down the road on 93 and a crack in my windshield just started showing up. I was scared. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to be decapitated? Then I'm like, okay, probably not. So like, calm down, And then I'm like, I call my insurance company. They tell me what to do. I then, press the button on my little Prius to call Granite State Glass and say, this is what's happening. This is what happened. And they're like, oh, you will be fine. You could drive the car. It's perfectly safe. That alleviated my stress dramatically. And then by the time I finished my drive to work, the entire problem was handled. I had an appointment. My insurance was covering it. I had a 0 deductible. It was going to be fixed the next day. Like I had nothing to worry about. But I had resources behind me that allowed me to go through that process in a half hour. I think of another family who may not have insurance because their finances are tighter than mine. They may only have the one vehicle that's shared between two parents. So the stress level of how do we give up the car for a day to get it fixed could be astronomical. The cost of replacing a windshield is not cheap if you don't have insurance. It's a lot of money, and so that stressor could have followed somebody for a month or more.
That's right.
And so like learning that in this field that families are always coming to each situation very differently. Mm-hmm. That diversity is much bigger than what we see on the outside even. Absolutely. And I thought when I think about resilience, I always try to keep that in mind because I used to have an expectation that people should bounce back from things more easily than they do sometimes, or they shouldn't, but they bounce back tremendously based on my own experience.
Absolutely.
And I think, we talk about a lot about bias, implicit bias and stuff. And I think watching families and how resilient they are and how different it is in the diversity, it taught me a lot, about people.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. And then another protective factor we alluded to was this idea of healthy social connection. And you and I had many conversations about this because I think, in the peer recovery world, we have had a terrible time kind of combating past directives that you have to give up people, places, and things. We know now that that's not true, that you need resources to be able to manage your people, places, and things.
Right.
And for some people, sometimes cutting people out of their lives is what they decide to do. But in family support, like we knew that a lot of times people were being expected to do that for different reasons, but it wasn't possible.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, just go into, recovery living for however many days, but they're a single parent.
That's right.
Or they're on probation and parole. They won't let them leave the state. They can't change the geographical setting.
Or they have a cat that they don't want to leave.
Yep. We saw that too. Right.
So yeah, that's simplistic, but having somebody to take care of the cat and having that friend or having that neighbor that can do that, or all of those things that are so important that those social connections can provide.
Mm-hmm.
Isolation is often one of the scariest things, I think, when we see a family or an individual who is isolated. Yeah. That to me is something that is really an issue that you want to address as much as you can, as quickly as you can, because that's just a scary thing to be isolated.
Yeah. And I
feel like you have no one.
Yeah. And I do think that's one of the reasons why I think family support specialists should be parent educators, because when you have a family support specialist, you build that trusting relationship in the home usually. And so it's less scary for that person to be invited to go to playgroup if you're going to be there, or to go to your first parent education class that you're running on a specific thing, and then, come, it would be such a great support for me. And, this is some of the stuff that we're talking about. Do you think you would like this, and build that relationship so it's not so scary.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I was going to say it is all about relationships, which we've known all along, but something that we just continue to need to acknowledge is that it is about relationships. It's not about the education you have, not about your degrees.
Yeah.
It's about that person's ability to relate to people, to be non-judgmental. I mean, if I'm going to mold a successful family support worker, it is those two qualities. Those that can build relationships, trusting relationships with others, and be non-judgmental.
Two primary.
And
Right.
kind.
Yeah. Just using my car example of my windshield being replaced. I just picked up the phone and called a friend and said, "Can you bring me to work?"
Mhm.
And again, it's like when you don't have that social connection, and it's another reason why I think the family resource centers have those programs, is to help build those connections for people who have maybe lost them or just need them. So, because I think especially young parents, before your kids get to school,
Mhm.
once your kids get to school and they get in sports and there's different things going on, if you're able to kind of support them, even like I was not a cheer mom in high school, but I knew some of the cheer moms, and I relied on them because I, was operating really as a single parent,
That's right.
doing everything, work, my job and stuff. And I really relied on them, for my daughter to have rides to different things or fundraising. They even helped me surprise her for her 16th birthday and brought roses and chocolates and cupcakes to one of the football games
Oh, yeah.
in September. I'll never forget it, to help surprise her.
Yeah.
And I literally just dropped the stuff and ran because that's what I had to do. At 16, she didn't care. Mom didn't hang around, right? But those social connections. I think sometimes we deny people a sense of identity too when we tell them, "Oh, you shouldn't hang around with those people." It's like remove that word "should," and thinking about even some of the folks that like play in bars, for instance, play music or telling them, "Oh, you can't do that anymore." I've heard that. And it's like, no, we don't say that stuff. All right. How about concrete supports in times of need? That is another protective factor. And I know for us, as an agency, like food insecurity is a big one. And so we're fortunate we have a really good relationship with the local food pantry, so we can access it like 24/7. Clothing, school supplies. You see, we have probably bought about $500 worth of school supplies just to have the basics available for our families. Yeah.
And I think that's usually that's often the reason that families walk into a family resource center is because they need some kind of concrete help.
Yeah.
And that again is where building that relationship. Yes, we can help you with housing. What else is going on in your life?
Yeah.
And that's why family resource centers are different. Build a relationship and then help with the concrete needs, with the wood, or with anything else.
Sometimes it's an electric bill or
whatever
for somebody to support.
And then because of the relationship you've built, they are able to move into other issues that are happening to them that you can support them. You can walk with them and try to solve what's happening in their life.
Because we do find like a lot of families, they're okay unless some small crisis happens. And I say small crisis, but to them it can be devastating. A tire blows.
That's right.
And it's going to be $200 to fix it. And they don't have the $200 unless they take it from their rent.
Because they don't have the tire, they can't go to work because they don't have a car and they don't have any other transportation. And then if they lose their job, what's going to happen to their housing? I mean, it does snowball. We know that. And that's why there is funding that now has been developed within the Family Resource Center network that can address those things. There was a time when it wasn't, and it was heartbreaking. When we were doing this, what do we do? I mean, that's it. We found it. We always found it. I can't say we didn't find it, but boy, it was hard. It took a lot of time.
Yeah. And it's gotten harder, I think, with the cost of electric going up and housing is just gone crazy. And, different parts of the country, we all have our different needs that come up.
Yeah.
We talk about emergent needs and Family Resource Centers kind of adapting, to what is the emergent need now. And housing by far in New Hampshire is so tough right now. And we find that we're continuously coaching families to access the pantry, because even if you're not food insecure, that money that you're saving can go towards your rent this month.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. And we also know, like, again, it's like if we can mitigate that stress, it makes it a better environment for families in the home. Yeah. Trestle funds.
That's it.
Trestle funds in our state was an award by New Hampshire Charitable Foundation that helped bolster families. Like, I love the name Trestle, because you're going to trestle the train tracks, bolstering families. That's made a huge difference.
Yes,
Yeah.
it has. And that was, I would say, just because from outside looking in, that was a lot of advocacy by the providers to say, we don't need more equipment.
Yeah.
What we need is money to address these concrete needs and get to be able to get it without question. That was always the issue. If we needed it for something, often you had to go through so many hoops and barriers to get that. And it's 3 weeks later that you're able to get it. Well, they needed it now.
Right.
So the Trestle Fund has been wonderful. Yeah. And that, I think, is due to the providers really advocating for that.
And we're very fortunate to have some funders that think
that's right.
It's worth it.
That believed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The knowledge of parenting and child development, that was something that had a huge impact on my life. I have never yelled at my kids again after taking active parenting of teens. And I tell the story of my young daughter refusing to go to cheer practice. And I was screaming at her from the bottom of the stairs that I wasn't killing myself to keep her in cheer, because it was an expensive sport, if she was going to lay in bed and not go to practice, and then I went up and I calmed down and I apologized to her for yelling and started my if and when training of taking a parent education class. If you stay in bed, then you're choosing to withdraw from cheer. I'm okay with it. I'm not mad at you. I'm no longer upset. I'm sorry that I yelled at you, but I just want you to understand the consequences of your choice. And then I went downstairs and sat in the car and waited. And she came down with her cheer stuff, and she ended up graduating from college as a cheerleader.
Yeah, I think this is one of the really important, what I've seen as a really important protective factor, mainly because of expectation.
Yes, and that's exactly
so many of the families that I would see had unrealistic expectations of that 18-month-old.
Yes.
Or that 2-year-old, or, and it wasn't their fault. They had nothing to fall back on. They had no knowledge to go back on to think, this is what developmentally maybe they don't know how to share at 2 years old. And this is why they're playing this way. And so I fall back on this protective factor. I used to fall back on it when I was working with families a lot. It's like that they really needed to know what were the expectations for that age group.
Yeah.
And when I worked with early intervention, not necessarily for that child's age group, but for their developmentally.
Yeah.
It was so important. And families, I think, all of a sudden became relieved that, we don't have to expect them to be talking at a year,
right.
And that there's nothing wrong with my child because she's not talking sentences at 12 months old. And so, that is a really important protective factor, because I think often that stresses families. If they expect too much, I think it often can be really stressful for families.
Yes. I can remember working with families that had young children doing chores that were just not developmentally appropriate, and then getting so angry at them, punishing them, they're supposed to change the cat box at 6 years old. And I was like, let's talk about, the developmental age and what, realistic expectations are. And then you tell me what you think about that.
And how you
You know.
can support them. And,
Yeah.
you know,
How
because,
do you come alongside of them?
you know, telling them to clean up the whole room. And they
It's overwhelmed.
so overwhelmed that they
Yeah.
can't even mobilize. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's really an important thing that needs to continue to be discussed as they grow.
I think the parents as teachers, growing bright kids, like there are some really great home visiting curriculums out there that really teach the value of coming alongside and not telling,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and how much kids learn from that and develop that connection, you know.
Right.
We talk about bonding and stuff like that. Yeah, I think working with families affected by substance use too, knowing that their own brains have been affected, that they may not get the good feels,
Right.
you know, that we tend to expect from parents in their relationship with their children. And, you know, that feeling of what's wrong with me, what's wrong with me. And it's like, no, nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with you. It's let's understand childhood development. Let's understand serve and return. And then let's also talk about your brain and the healing process of being somebody in recovery and why it's going to look a little different than what, you know, the Pampers commercials talk about,
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
although we don't see those much anymore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that leads into that social and emotional competence of children. You know, we think about, you know, a child's ability to communicate things. And I think this was a big eye-opening thing for me too, as a parent, that my daughter wasn't trying to be willfully defiant about not going to cheer. She was communicating something to me.
Right.
And it was exhaustion.
Yeah.
You know, that, you know, between all the sports and cheer practice and the demands of school at that time and stuff, it was exhaustion that she was communicating to me. I didn't hear it. What I heard is the money that I was spending as a stressed parent on the cost of cheer practice, you know. And I have to say, it takes a community and a healthy social network. You know, it's like, God bless that cheer gym owner, because she worked with me. And I'll tell you, the day I went back in and handed her $1,000 check to catch up on everything was like the day I finally felt good about myself again as a parent. But I didn't want my daughter to be damaged because of my ineptitude, is what it felt like as a parent. So I went in there with my hat in my hand and asked, is there any way she can stay in to the end of the season? And then I'll come back and I'll try to make it up somehow. And they let her stay in. So, and, you know, learning to advocate for myself in times of need too.
Yeah.
I think, you know, helps us build those social networks, helps us see the resources that are out there. And it's not easy. It is never easy asking for help. But building that social emotional competence for kids, for them to be able to communicate to us their needs, sometimes we don't even see it.
Yeah. And this is I think this really speaks to, it's a parent-child relationship. So it takes both of them. And that sometimes we need to help the child to build their social emotional competencies. Again, depending on their age. And I think especially if we see a child with a developmental delay or a disability, or a child with autism, this becomes even more important because they don't have the same social emotion, and the parent can get very frustrated.
Oh, yes.
That it's them. But it is the communication that isn't possible because of what's happening with the child. And so just understanding that it isn't just me, it's two of us. And sometimes it is the child. It's not wrong. It's just that's who they are and what they are. And so that just becoming aware that does make a difference in your relationship, that social emotional development of the child makes a difference in your relationship.
Yeah.
It's not just you.
Yeah.
So.
And it's really learning, you know, on both sides. I think about this because I get very frustrated sometimes with the apps advertised on Facebook about attention deficit disorders. And, you know, I have spent a lifetime programming somebody in my life saying, you are wonderfully made. You know, you're wired a little bit different. You know, you'll see words like neurodivergent. Don't listen to that stuff. Like you're just who you are.
Yeah.
You know, and with that wiring comes different gifts, different skills, and different things that you got to manage, you know, attention being one of them. And I can remember, you know, the difference in treatment between an educated parent and an uneducated parent was, you know, one thinking that this child was being willfully defiant.
Yes.
when he would forget his science book at home or he forgot his gym clothes. And it was like, damn kid can't get his stuff straight, that kind of stuff. Whereas the parent that had been through our parent education program was like, oh no, it's not willful defiance. He just forgot. We got to make a tool for him to be able to remember. So a little Velcro, little chart with your sneakers, your backpack, your school, your science book, your math book, whatever it was that he would forget would get added to the list. And every day before school, they would check the list and check it off together. Oh, nope, I don't have my gym sneakers, and so before they got out the door, they would have that stuff. And I think that was the value of, it was, and in that case, it was a special ed para that, very often they're family support specialists in those roles that help work through that situation. And what a difference between, the stress of forgetting for the third time that week something that he needs, and having to run back to school, to have that support to be able to manage those things. And I think even as an adult with attention deficit issues, like I live by Google Calendar. I have people in my social network that know, 3:00 this day. Oh, I could be wrong, because, these things follow us through our whole life, and I do feel like family resource centers get that.
Mhm.
So they're not going to judge you. And, and a good family support specialist, they train themselves up on all of this stuff with every family that comes through the door. There's like new challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Karen, is there anything else that you would like to share? I can't thank you enough for all the work that you have done for the state of New Hampshire. Your name comes up so often in the association meetings of the directors of all the family resource centers for the work that you've done to push, for getting us organized, for getting data platform, to measure, the work that we're doing. You've helped us, looking at some of our programs to evaluate them and to move forward with this evidence-based study and things. You have left a legacy, I would say, not only here in New Hampshire, but, across the country with the work that you've done with the National Family Support Network and in Massachusetts and all these different venues. So we are very grateful for your presence in our world.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate it. I really feel like it's been a privilege to work with the people in this field and to do whatever contribution I could do. So I really appreciate your kind words.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Archways Threads. If there is a topic you'd like to see us cover, email us at podcast@archwaysnh.org or call us at 603-960-2128. Visit our website at archwaysnh.org to learn more about the Archways family of recovery and family resource centers.